Welcome to my first ever Be Miles Ahead show. To be honest with you, my social anxiety is totally kicking in right now, but like all things in life, you have to start somewhere. And, running isn't just a hobby to me, it's truly become a passion over time. And so, one of my goals with these longer format videos is to dive deeper into the science behind running, some of the running training methods that are out there, trending topics within the sport of distance running, and maybe even one day get to the point where I can have a one on one conversation with a guest. But for the purposes of this show today, I wanted to just have a discussion with you about my background and ultimately how I got to where I am today, not only as a marathoner, but also as a running coach. So, for starters, I hated running initially. Um, and I remember growing up and going on little short runs with friends, whether it be around the neighborhood and whatnot. This is the early 2000s where you're forced just to get out of the house and go do something all the time. And you'd run a mile or two and you'd run as fast as you could. And you'd probably kind of try to race your friends a little bit. And I never enjoyed it. It always did feel like punishment. Even those little mile time trials you would do, in high school or grade school, certainly were not my favorite. And I honestly laugh still because I did track and field in seventh and eighth grade, I want to say it was. And I participated in the 400 meter and 400 meter hurdles. And I'm pretty sure I got dead last in every single race I ran. I could not tell you the times I ran, but I can tell you for sure that I finished last. And that didn't last long. I wasn't an athlete by any stretch growing up. I started playing basketball and football at later ages. And as a result of that, I was very mediocre at all of it. And when I did play football, I played safety because I wanted to be the last man back. So, you know, I couldn't play corner because I couldn't keep up with the wide receivers. So I was like, oh, if I line up 10 yards behind the offense, like I get to run to the ball and hopefully not get beat deep. So there was logic behind the position I ultimately played. And then, too, I just knew I was too slow to do anything else. And again, that was just me kind of probably in my own head a little bit at a young age. But I don't come from a family of athletes by any stretch. My siblings growing up played a lot of soccer. I quit playing soccer in about third, fourth grade just because I couldn't score goals. And I was like, what the heck is this? Got super frustrated and just kind of focused on other things. So, running, athletics, all of that just wasn't for me initially. And it really wasn't until uh, 2013 when I was getting ready to graduate college that I discovered running. And it was actually one of my old college roommates who had started running. And I was like, oh, if he can do it, I certainly should give this a try. So I remember one day putting on a pair of, Nike free knit fives or whatever they were called at the time and going out and running less than a mile. And I still post it every now and then on social media because it's such a good reminder of you have to start somewhere. And I went out that day and I ran less than a mile at like an 8:35 pace and I was gassed. Let me tell you, like this run was brutal. I was so tired and I almost swore to myself. I was like, no, this isn't for me, clearly, right? And I decided then, a day later, I was like, let's go give this another shot and let's go complete the mile. And from 1 mile, it became 2 miles. And 2 miles ultimately kind of led to that 5K mark. The goal was always to get to that 3.1 mile mark. And just maintain some level of consistency at that level. And it took some time, and I had no idea what I was doing. I was continuing to just lace up, no stretching, nothing, go run probably as quickly as I could at that time. And every run was basically the same, kind of depending on how I felt. And maybe I was probably doing this 3 or 4 times a week, right? So, the scale of the runs was, the volume just wasn't there. And it got to the point, I think I was running 5Ks several times a week and started to notice some improvement there. And I would do it with some of my roommates. And so we had fun with it after work and on weekends and things like that. And I'll never forget, one time when I got bit by a dog on a 5K. A little puppy ran up, jumped on my leg, bit me. I looked down about a mile later, see blood gushing down my leg. And I was like, oh, it's this little harmless puppy. But then everyone's like, oh, you might have rabies. You need to go get checked out. Well, I went to go try to find that dog in that neighborhood all week long, never saw him again. So now when I run by dogs, sometimes you'll see me swerve a little bit away just because you never know if they can jump on you. But to be honest with you, I love dogs. So it's kind of a silly little thing. But I always kind of vividly remember that moment of my 5K journey, where shortly after I then decided that if I can run all these 5Ks, let's run like 5 miles. Um, so I remember going to run 5 miles, and then five became that 10K mark because I was like, well, if you can do five, you could probably go to 6.2. Never raced a 10K or anything like that, never raced a 5K during this time period. It was merely just to get out and be active and not try to gain weight post college when you didn't have a gym membership and you still wanted to kind of live that post college lifestyle a little bit. And so I just kind of continued to push myself from there. And the 10K ultimately led to a 7 mile run. 7 miles led to 10. And that first 10 miler I ever did was on New Year's Eve one year. And I remember saying, it's December 31st. If we're going to go out and have fun and celebrate the new year with friends all night, I need to earn it. And what does that look like to me? And that's going to be running 10 miles. And I don't care how long it takes me, I need to do this. So I went out and I slogged through 10 miles around, I want to say it was like a 10:45 or 10:55 type pace. So this is a winter in South Florida. The weather's still pretty warm, but not nearly as bad as the summers. Got through it and then decided, I said, well, great. I've gone 10 miles. I should now probably be able to do a half marathon. Um, and all of this took course over about a year, year and a half or so, because I would have started running in May of 2013. My first half marathon ended up being in April of 2014. So, sorry, actually, that is only 11 months. But either way, I remember then doing that half marathon and I ran it in 2:14:14, something like that. And one of my good college buddies actually finished ahead of me. He was running a little bit at this time as well and doing some pretty impressive distances for not really being a runner himself or doing much training. I think he ran like a 16-mile run one day and then kind of called it quits from there. But he ended up beating me, so he never lets me live that down, and he'll always remind me to this day that he is 1-0 versus me in the half marathon. And as much as I try to tell him, let's go again, it's never going to happen. Um, but good for him. It's fun banter either way. And so all of that then kind of led to just staying in half marathon shape year round and forcing myself to kind of keep up with some form of a long run. Again, there was very little structure to what I was doing in the early days. Uh, I had no idea what I was doing. This is, mid 2000s, like I said, 2013, 14, 2015. There weren't a ton of training plans online necessarily, or that I was really looking for and seeking out, thinking that, oh, this is something I can probably excel at. So I'd run 4 times a week, after work or whenever I had time. And I would just kind of lace up and go out and just run. Again, very little warm up, very little structure. It was all one pace, go. And over time, of course, naturally, you're going to see improvements. And I certainly started to see some improvement. The distances started becoming easier. You would recover a little bit faster. And I just kept doing half marathons and kept signing up for them. Did a couple 5Ks here and there, with family or with friends. But I was always like, well, why would I pay to go run a 5K? I do that all the time, on my daily runs or whatever. So why am I going to go pay $40 for this? That was always kind of my tone towards the 5K early on. And from there, it was half marathon after half marathon after half marathon, and got it down to, I think in my second one, I ran like a 1:59. So I made some vast improvements in the half marathon, between the first to the second. And then from there, just kind of continued to hover around that 150 mark for quite some time, and wasn't really sure if I would ever be able to really break it, at least not with the training style that I was going through, and how I was training, I should say. So it got to, you know, a point I remember in 20, this would have been 2016, one winter. I was back home in Minnesota with family, and my older sister had told me, "Hey, Brandon, like you've done quite a few half marathons now. Would you consider running the New York City Marathon with me?" And this is back when the New York City Marathon was still a paid lottery system, so the application numbers were a lot less. So I said, sure, sure, absolutely. Like I'll pay the $5 or $7 it costs to enter this lottery. So she goes ahead and proceeds to register me. At least so we thought, because turns out my application never actually got submitted to the race, and I was never charged a lottery fee. Where she proceeded afterwards to register herself. Hers went through. So something happened with the internet, and mine didn't go through. So fast forward a couple months, she finds out she gets into the race. So she's messaging me, "Hey, I got in. Did you like get an email? Like, let me know. I'm excited." No, nothing. Not even a confirmation email. That's kind of where we discovered that something must have happened early on. So she went on to race New York City in 2016, and I believe that was actually her second to last marathon, or last marathon she completed that I know of. But that moment kind of inspired me, and it told me, hey, I'd committed to doing this, and hopefully, had I got in committing to training and working towards getting through 26.2 miles, which, the way I felt after running 13.1, I was very unsure how this was even going to happen, right? But I figured, just like, if I'm able to show up every day, do some of these longer runs and training, we'll get there. So it gets to, late 2016, she races and she comes to me again and says, "Hey, because we didn't get in last year, how about we run the Twin Cities Marathon? And there's no lottery, so we just have to register. You know, I still live here. You grew up in this area. How cool would that be to run your hometown race, more or less, for your first marathon?" And I totally agreed. I said this would be phenomenal. It's usually a cool time of year in early October. So we did. We both signed up. We trained. We didn't train together or virtually or anything like that. And my runs just became longer over that summer. And again, no structure. I was doing long runs every other week. So say I would run 12 miles on a Saturday, and 2 Saturdays from then I would run maybe 13 miles, and then 2 Saturdays from then I would run 14. And I got up to, I want to say it was 17 miles in training, and that's where I maxed out. I was probably running 25 to 30 miles a week at most. Um, and again, there was no variety in that training whatsoever. I knew very, very little about nutrition, very, very little about fuel, recovery. I was wearing Hoka's that a local running store had put me in. So at least at this point in time, I had gone and done some of the right things, and said, "Hey, I got to get out of these Nikes before my Achilles or something goes." And they agreed. She's like, "Oh, thank God you're here, because like if you kept running on these, like your Achilles, might have gone. It's starting to look a little swollen." So she put me in Hoka Clifton threes. That's how long ago this was. I think they're on like the 10 or 11 now. So I ran in those for a couple of years and got through the Twin Cities Marathon, with my family being there and supporting me. My sister, unfortunately, was unable to complete the race, and I think she dropped out around mile 17. I was ahead of her during the race, but she had also just discovered that she was pregnant with my nephew Jackson. And so it's really cool um, to look back on that moment now and always kind of remember, oh, here's my amazing nephew, and this is ultimately why you weren't able to kind of finish that race. So that's neat. So good on her. Uh, and from there, I ran a 4:49 for my first marathon. It was cold, it was wet, and I was freezing cold at the end. Um, and I didn't know if I would ever do it again. I honestly didn't. And I think eventually you just kind of get that itch to come back and continue to push yourself, and not necessarily at the time beat that 4:49, but just prove to myself that, hey, anyone can maybe do this once, but can I do it a second time, and what's that going to look like? So I did. I signed up for the Marine Corps marathon the following year, and again trained up to 17 miles. Basically did a rinse and repeat of what I did for the Twin Cities Marathon. Showed up that October on another cold, cold Sunday morning in Alexandria, ready to run through the monuments of DC. My brother, his girlfriend, my dad were there to support me. And that was a special moment. I remember stopping along the course. I have videos of it, which are phenomenal just to look back at. I was getting interviewed by my dad, like, oh, how do you feel? Would you run another one? And I was like, absolutely not. Um, classic thing to say at the end of your second marathon. I did run a 4:49 there as well. Again, I would have beaten that time had I not stopped for as long and talked with family and whatnot. But either way, I was still super proud and went off on a limb and signed up for Berlin then in 2019. Entered that lottery with a friend, and we got in. So now I was headed towards marathon number 3. And I don't need to get into the details of every marathon here as I kind of talk about my background, but that was a special moment, and a moment that, you know, I didn't understand the gravity of the Abbott World Marathon Majors. Um, I just love Germany. I'd been to Berlin before, and so I was intrigued, and that's why I wanted to do it. I had no idea what the 6 World Majors really were all about, even though I had already applied to try to enter New York. I didn't fully understand it, or that they were such a big deal, and that many people were trying to go after the 6 star and be on a 6 star journey, kind of a thing, and eventually that will become 9, right? So I certainly did not appreciate it as much as I should have while I was running it. I look back today and I'm like, man, I really wish I could have taken it in a little bit more. I did run a 4:24 there, so I had clearly at that point set a marathon PR. So I was excited about that, and went down to Munich and had experienced Oktoberfest with friends, and that was an incredible moment for all of us to be able to experience not only the race, but then going to Munich and seeing what Oktoberfest is all about, and getting into some shenanigans there. And at that point, I knew that I probably had something in the marathon, and that was now at this point something that I would just continue to excel at or continue to pursue. Uh, so, and to kind of speed this up a little bit, since I started running, I've now completed 19 half marathons, and I've completed a total of 7 marathons. And my half marathon personal best is a 1:24, and my marathon PR from Indianapolis in 2023 is 2:58:13. And the reason I say 2:58:13 and emphasize the 13 is because of the Boston Marathon and the fact that I had qualified. I needed to run a 3:05 or under to qualify. And this was my first attempt at ever trying to run under 3 hours. And I was able to do so on the first attempt and ended up getting cut in last year's 6:51 cut in addition to the qualifying time. So had I ran a 6:50, no, sorry, a 6:49, I would have been in. Or no, sorry, 6:47, I would have been in. I got cut by 4 seconds. So that has certainly fueled me the last couple of years, or last year, I should say. And I'll get there. I'm not going to overly stress about it. I know what I need to do to get there. People are getting faster. I need to make some tweaks in my own training. And these are some things I hope we can talk about in these videos here. And you know, and I'll get into it in a moment of kind of why and some things I understand that I need to change. And I'll talk about it as I get into some things about coaching here. But the biggest thing I think that changed my running trajectory, where I went from a 4:24 in the marathon to a 3:29 in the marathon between 2019 and this was now 2022, where I made that jump. And it was hiring a coach. A good friend of mine who now actually lives out in Arizona had seen, that I was running marathons and, you know, all these half marathons. And I think he was probably thinking, oh, his times are kind of stagnant. Like he's got the potential to get better, but he probably just needs to, revamp his training a little bit, look at things a little bit differently. So he recommended I get in touch with this guy in Fort Lauderdale. And so I did. I said, thank you. I'll certainly reach out and kind of see what this is all about. So we talked about my running journey and what that was all going to look like. And we kind of interviewed each other and we decided that we would start working together. And that was the biggest, life change that I have made. And this was now the summer of 2021 when we started working together. And I went from running probably 4 times a week to 6 and started, varying workouts where we would do speed sessions. Long runs were consistent long runs. They weren't every other week. And the whole training style just was flipped upside down. And I was exposed to a whole new world of running and what it could be. And improvement started just happening rapidly. And I loved it. And I wanted more. And of course, you come down with little injuries here and there due to strength deficiencies and whatnot. But we continued to push through, and I was able to run that 3:29 in the marathon in Philadelphia. And that's where I realized just how important having someone on your side can be, and someone who believes in you. And so, kept kind of pushing through there. We worked through to obviously then achieve the sub 3 hour time. And from there, I've actually been self-coached since 2023. After that race in Indianapolis, I have self-coached myself through the last 2 marathons that I've ran, which leads me in to coaching and ultimately why I kind of got into it and what I hope to ultimately get out of it, I guess, in a way. So, I loved working with a coach, and he was phenomenal. And it was. I understand. He got busy and wasn't able to really coach anymore, and so, I kind of then started just continuing along that path. I'd learned a lot of tools and methodology from him, and so I started kind of just implementing that myself. Well, I kind of was unsure of, are we going to work together anymore? What are we kind of doing? And so, he was always there as a resource too if I had questions, and still is today. So no ill will there. I'm super grateful to have been able to work for him or with him, and still have ties to him today. I very much coach like him. I tell a lot of athletes that and whatnot. So it's no secret there. So Shout out to him. And it's one of those things where you start working with somebody and you understand just how much that they can change your trajectory in the sport. So once I kind of ultimately started coaching myself through these plans, found out, he was no longer really involved in coaching athletes because of his schedule. I just continued to dive in and explore more on the sport myself. And that ultimately led to the International Sports Science Association and their coaching certificate program, which I proceeded to sign up for and do a self study course in the summer of, this was now the summer of 2024, I want to say. So I went through that in about a couple of months. I think there were like 10 different modules, things with quizzes, and then ultimately a pretty intense final exam, beyond the science of running and programming for runners and you name it, and absolutely loved it. Like I was like a kid in a candy store kind of reading this material. I'm like, and then trying to dive in a little bit more. Uh, and so absolutely loved it. And, wasn't really sure how I was going to find athletes to coach um, outside of, local runners perhaps. And so what I did is once I passed the exam, I actually ended up doing kind of a free trial thing and worked with a lot of runners in the local community here that I run with as part of a run club that I'm part of. More people I knew, some old friends and whatnot, and coach them through either a half marathon or a marathon for free. So a full 14, 16, 18-week plan, complimentary, so I can apply the learnings from my course and to make sure that I could structure plans and I enjoyed doing it for others and that I could do it and to prove to myself that I could. And so, you know, all of them were willing to put their trust in me, and I got them all to the finish line. Granted, it was all of their work that really got them to the finish line. Uh, and I truly believe that as a coach that, we're just there to be a resource to them, to provide them with some guidance into ways that they can train appropriately for their goals, hopefully to prevent injury and to challenge themselves beyond maybe what they think is capable, what they're capable of. And so, you know, I'm there as the resource. I can provide some insights, some personal experience, as well as dive into some of the scientific type things that I certainly love, and be able to explain the why behind certain things that they're doing. But at the end of the day, they're the ones executing those workouts and those runs. So they're due all the credit in the world to finish those races. And I couldn't be more proud of all of them for what they've been able to achieve in running. Even if I am no longer working with them at this point in time, due to whatever reason it may be, uh, I wish them nothing but the best in their running journey. And I'll support them forever. And I'm currently coaching 6 athletes right now, all for marathons. And it's something I try to always kind of remind myself to do is let them know just how proud of them I am. Uh, I think that can go a long ways. It can be a grind training for a marathon, and any way that I can lift them up, help support them is important. One of my personal philosophies in coaching is also if I wouldn't do it, I'm not going to prescribe it to them. And that kind of leads to me looking at, my own training and making some changes because, I think in the last 6 months or so, I've started implying or applying some different training techniques on long runs and things that I know I need to kind of start doing myself. And that's like speed work in long runs and being a little bit more consistent on some of those and doing some additional progression runs um, as well. So I look at coaching as I'm able to intercept newer runners or runners who are looking to advance their running journey. Um, and I'm able to kind of intercept them and help guide them in the right direction and get to where they want to be and beyond. Um, but in turn, I'm inspired by them as well. And that's the most important thing, I think, is that we all support each other at the end of the day. Um, I, will watch them race. I will track them during their races, and and it's honestly it's the most exciting thing ever to see all of their hard work pay off. It's so hard to describe, but I absolutely love it, and hopefully it's something I can continue to do for a long, long period of time. Uh, But ultimately, at the end of the day, I just love talking running, and that is the exact purpose of this show. Moving forward, I understand that I can't make little short form videos all the time talking about some scientific things of running because they're a little too complex and they could get a little long, and I can be a little long winded as I talk. So if you've made it this far in the video, honestly, thank you. Um, there wasn't a lot of humor necessarily in this video, or it wasn't overly engaging. It's just my story, yeah, or parts of my story, I guess. So hopefully, I did a decent job kind of outlining that for you. And I look forward to seeing kind of where this journey will take us in the future. As far as a posting schedule goes, I'm thinking you know, maybe once a month I'll do a video. If I can do two a month, that would be great. But we'll see. I just knew it's important to start somewhere. And instead of just thinking about it, I figured I would act on it. So thank you for listening. And until next time, be miles ahead.